Hi, and welcome to this week's UMIP Community Review call. This week we have one pull request, one UMIP to review, which is an update very similar to UMIP 140. So I'll just share my screen and bring it up. I can see that both you and Alex have reviewed John, and that Bifomex, who is the author of the UMIP, has responded. Alex, I think you were the first to initially review. Do you want to talk a little about it?
Yeah, I mean, I really was mainly just comparing to the previous UMIP 140 and kind of seeing kind of some of the differences. And yeah, I think my question was just more, I think like around like the details of just like the actual data source that is changing. And I was just kind of trying to think through just like any added risks of going from what they're using in UMIP 140 versus kind of the change. I think like that's probably like just thinking through like any additional added risks from this change. But yeah, that's like John, when you were reviewing, did you see anything that kind of stuck out as like bringing on additional risk?
So I mainly had two questions. There's a correction factor that existed in the prior UMIP that was removed in this one when I was looking at the diff. So I asked a question pretty recently, so like they haven't had a chance to respond yet about just why that is. I don't know if that's an additional risk or not, because I don't actually understand what the correction factor really is. But I'm curious to hear what their answer is of like why they think it's not necessary and what purpose they think it served to begin with. And then the other question was just whether they had tested that the price feed implementation is working as expected with the new API, since they had to switch to a different one since the original one was made private. I also think that since the other API was made private, we should probably delist the original identifier since it doesn't work, and it probably doesn't make sense to update it because I don't think anybody intends to use it in its original state.
Yeah. I think the reason they didn't want to update it was because they have live contracts with 140. I think if there weren't those live contracts, it would be okay to update.
Yeah, I didn't realize they had existing live contracts. So I think that makes sense. And then once those contracts expire, maybe we can delist it.
Well, it's weird though, because if the implementation doesn't give you a path to verify what the result should be for a dispute, that's kind of strange. So I think we would probably have to wind up. I mean, it always says like fall back to like something else if you're not able to access the data. You know what I mean?
So you're talking more like if the API is down, kind of like I did kind of notice that there isn't like a way of like manually going through this calculation if there were severe issues with like these APIs being down.
What I mean is for like the prior SPAC UMIP, because they're saying that they needed to update the API endpoint because the original API endpoint moved to private. And so if there are contracts that are still out there using the original UMIP, that could create a weird situation if there's a dispute, because voters won't have an easy way to go and verify what the answer should be and would actually need to find a new API to find that information, which might be the one that they're specifying here. So that's why I was bringing up that one, which is actually kind of separate from the consideration for this new UMIP. So I don't have any real blockers for this one. I just would like to see like answers to those questions, particularly around the correction factor and whether they've tested their new price feed implementation and made sure that it works the way that they expect. And I also made a couple of just minor grammatical kind of comments that they could integrate.
Thanks, John. I haven't formally reviewed this, But one thing that jumped out to me was that they were changing the basket weekly to the top 10 gainers, I think. Now, that seemed to me to be quite unverifiable, that there's no way that, other than trusting them, that they will put the top 10 gainers correctly in the basket.
Well, they did have they had a methodology for getting like the new top 10 basically. So now they've got like the two sources of like the prices of the SPACs, and then also like here's how you determine who is in like the new basket.
Okay. So that's all kind of covered in the resolution.
In like the, I think the technical details or somewhere in the doc, they were kind of going over how you do that. It is weird though, because you could have very sudden shifts in the values, and that kind of comes back to the correction factor too, where they've removed this like variable that's the correction factor where you're rolling over to some new value. And that seems like it might be useful even more so for this new system, unless I am misunderstanding what that's for. Because if a bunch of prior SPACs were going down and then you're switching over to the ones that are gaining, it seems like you would just get a ton of liquidations on a regular basis. If anybody's close to the edge, you switch to a new basket and they're instantly underwater.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
You're always switching to the ones that are worth the most.
Yeah.
And it's a shift. So it sounds like it's a shift like at the end of every week. I mean, I was kind of, so it would be basically like that Monday would be like the shift, and it would be, that's where you'd probably see like a lot of possible liquidations when those changes are made. Is that kind of like what you're?
I think like after markets close on Friday is how I interpreted it, but it also wasn't very specific about exactly when you do that switch. So before you change the basket, you're going to have probably a pretty different and lower value of the, I think the value before you make the change is always going to be lower than the value after the change by definition. Like if the basket is changed, it's always changing upwards, which means that you're leaning more towards like a liquidatable value. So this feels like this actually, I'm shifting a little bit now to being slightly more concerned about that. So I'd like a much clearer answer on the correction factor and how they deal with that like liquidation risk in their intended product. And I'll post some comments to that effect too.
Yeah, it would be, I would almost like want to see like a back test of some sort to like kind of see like what those possible changes would look like with previous weeks, because it's hard to kind of gauge like how significant those could be. But you're right, like that shift every week would, I don't know, be interesting. And also like if I'm investing in it, it's something that you'd really want to make sure you're like letting your users know of the possible implications.
Cool. Okay. Would you say this was a no-go or a go with conditionals?
I think there's more to consider here. I'm more leaning towards no-go and just delay for like at least another week, just to kind of think through all the implications of that. Because I think that is like a weird switch where it's always ratcheting upwards to being like more liquidatable, and it's worth thinking it through.
Okay, cool.
What do you think, Alex? Do you disagree with that? It's
No,
like a real opinion on my part.
I agree. I think that like maybe like right after this we could ask them their thoughts. Maybe they've thought it through, but I think we could ask right after this. Until we feel comfortable on that, I feel like I agree. It's like probably a no-go, unless we're like missing something. But yeah, I agree.
Sean reviews the original 140. Is it worth asking him for a review, given that he's got a level of familiarity with this?
I think so, particularly around the correction factor, which I'd like to understand better. because that might actually be part of a solution to that concern about like sudden liquidations on a weekly basis.
Mhm. Cool. Okay, so we have pull request 559, that's no go. And we're looking to have clarification over the correction factor. Clarity over the resolution path, and understanding more about the switch and how that impacts liquidations. And we'll also ask for a review from Sean.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
Cool. Is there anything else to discuss?
The DVM 2.01, I see it's still in a draft, so it's kind of like we're holding off on that one.
Yeah, Chris wanted to get it up so that other people could take a look at it, but it's just up there just now because Chris has been on leave for the next week. So it's not something we need to consider just now.
Okay, that makes sense. I think we're in good shape then.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks very much, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ori. Thanks, Alex.